Welcome back to Horrifically Well Read, Bled, and Said. Today we are absolutely honored to have with us four-time Bram Stoker award-winning author Gwendolyn Kiste. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, no, I'm so excited to talk to you. There are so many wonderful things that we have read by you and so many cool things to talk about. And one thing in about 2 months will be the Stoker Awards again. We're coming up on the anniversary of you winning Best Novel for The Haunting of Velkwood, and it will be pretty much near your hometown, right?
Yeah, yeah, like Pittsburgh's not very far from where I'm at. So yeah, I'm very, very excited for Stoker Con and the Stokers this year. I get to go and cheer everybody on, which is so exciting. Like no pressure at all. Like I just get to go and cheer on all my friends, a bunch of people that I absolutely adore are nominated.
Yes, I love that, and, I wish they did. I don't know how they do it, but at the Oscars, I know it's kinda like whoever won last year gets to present this year. Do you get to, like, give the best novel away or anything like that?
I don't know. They haven't asked me. I know last year was a guest of honor. It was Joyce Carol Oates and then John Edward Lawson. And I also gave away I also was there for in short nonfiction last year. So I actually gave away, that award. So like, I don't know. Either way, I'm good. I'm good. I'm just happy. I'm excited. It's always the ballot's always so exciting to see.
Yeah, definitely, and that's just one of the coolest, like, actual trophies, like, of any that I've seen too,
It's adorable. I love it. It's very cute. It's a little haunted house for anyone who hasn't seen
right?
it. It's pretty fun.
Which
So
is
cute.
perfect for the book that we're going to be talking about, especially today.
Indeed.
Yeah, The Haunted Houses She Calls Her Own, which is, like, what a freaking evocative title, like, I just love that, and obviously, there's a story titled that in here, but as soon as I saw it in the cover of just the kind of, like, repeating houses, I was like,
Mhm.
"Give this book to me yesterday, please."
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I was very, very excited about that cover. The cover artist Scott Cole did a great job.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love the colors and
Mhm.
the pattern. It's just like it has a great these are obviously colors that work really well together, create a great juxtaposition, but it's just like the feel of it. It feels like you're about to get into some shit,
It's
you know?
amazing. Yes, yes. Yeah, it's like I love red. I love the color red in general, and I think it's used so well on that cover. I'm very, very happy.
It is. It really is.
yeah, definitely, and, I'm always interested, in when short story collections comes out. Is there a certain time period that these come from? Like, how did you decide what stories were gonna go into this collection?
I think not all, but most of them have been published since my last collection, but that's not really narrowing it down. My last collection came out like 9 years ago. It'll be 9 years to the day between my collections. The first collection came out on April 14th, 2017, and then this one's coming out on April 14th, 2026. So most of them are from that time period, but again, that doesn't narrow it down that much. So yeah, like it's a
That
lot
is
of
yeah.
just Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, yeah, so, obviously, there's that. There's many years to work from, so, how did you
Mhm.
decide, like, what was going here?
I started putting together it just sort of started with a few that I'm like, "Okay, I'm particularly proud of these ones." I'm proud of all of them, right? They're like all our children. Like, I feel like as writers, we it's like, "Oh, I love all of them," you know? You toil over them, and then you feel a little bit protective of them. But I really, I wanted to put in my Stoker award-winning story that's a retelling of Dracula from Lucy's perspective, The Eight People Who Murdered Me, excerpt from Lucy Westenra's diary. And from there, I thought it would be interesting to kind of see, put together a couple different retellings. There's like a Bluebeard retelling in here. There's a werewolf, not exactly like Little Red Riding Hood, but definitely like fairy tale werewolf story. There's a all female apocalyptic sapphic retelling of Julius Caesar. So there's a lot of different things like that of like, okay, how can I, find these different ways to explore this theme, but not have the stories necessarily feel redundant in any way.
No, that's very cool 'cause, there are so many different types of stories in here, but they definitely do all feel like they belong in a collection together.
There is a cohesivity.
Thank you. Thank you. That's always, I feel like, what every person who puts together a collection wants to hear, so thank you.
And I just already said it before on another podcast, but anything that has a Bluebeard, like I'm reading it. It's just I don't know why. Intriguing and manipulative and crazy character. And I think because I didn't hear about Bluebeard until probably like 3, 4 years ago. I don't know how I never heard. And I
Mhm.
was like, "Who is this? What is this?" I had to like look it up. So was that always something you knew about, or is that recently like a stumble
You
upon as
know,
well?
that's such an interesting point. I think I learned about Bluebeard probably 10 to 15 years ago, but still I was already an adult when it happened, and I thought the same thing you did. Now, I may have heard Bluebeard, but, like, there's also, like, Blackbeard the pirate, I think, and so
Right.
I think I conflated them growing up, and I thought they were talking about
Okay.
a pirate. And then at some point I realized, like, no, Bluebeard is something completely different, and then it was, like, kind of going down that rabbit hole, and it's like, "Whoa, this is a very upsetting story." So, yeah, I mean, it may have
I am
actually been
so happy you said that because I always did the exact same thing where "So this pirate killed all his wives? That's weird."
I think I did the same thing for a while too, that I still conflated them even once I learned about Bluebeard, like, "Okay, so he was a pirate that did this," and then I'm like, "No, no, that's definitely not the original story." I think I really kind of realized what Bluebeard was when I read The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, because that's the title story is a
Right.
Bluebeard retelling, and so that was the point where I was like, "Okay, this is something very separate from what I grew up maybe thinking it was," if I'd heard of it. Again, I'm sure I heard of Bluebeard at some point, but like I said, I definitely mixed it up.
Well, I love that, you kind of modernize it and put it into the, like, world of fashion, and then,
Mhm.
like, these artists that, like, people worship even though they're god awful people, which, we're hearing a lot of that happening right now, no,
Yeah.
recently, so I love that you did that. I thought it was really on point for the time, but then also, like, really paying homage in a really cool way to, like, that historical kinda story.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I feel like we're having at least somewhat of a reckoning over the last 5 to 10 years with, like you said, terrible artists who everyone kind of excused 'cause, "Oh, they're making great art." And it's like, "Yeah, but
Mhm.
at whose expense?" And I think that that's such an important conversation to have because I think we really need to be reckoning with that, that just because somebody even makes great art, if it's even great art, because a lot of times I don't think it's as great of art as people say it is anyways, but really looking at this and being like, "Is it worth the human toll?" Because I very much don't think it ever is. So, yeah, and also
Ever.
it's not that
Yeah.
hard to be it's not that hard to not be terrible. I think that that's the thing we lose sight of, that have to go out of your way to be terrible to people. So that was definitely
Can we
all those things where I was thinking about that.
can we say that to men? I'm sorry, like, it's not that hard to be
It's
terrible.
really not,
It's
like
not that hard to not be terrible.
I think
Yeah.
that needs to be a sticker, a shirt,
I
something like
know,
that,
because, like, it's just as we go off on our first tangent here, like, a friend of mine has, like, dated one guy who had a PFA, another guy who was like, "Oh, she's lying. I didn't need this PFA." And I'm like, maybe on the oft random chance that like these things are, alleged but like what kind of behaviors and
Yeah.
actions have you been acting in and entering in general that put you in a position
Mhm.
to even have things of like, I wasn't actually, making it that she couldn't drive the car away, or, I
Yeah.
wasn't actually stalking her. I was just doing this. Like, well, you know what? Like, let's check about what terrible things are how like, and that's what it kind of feels like of isn't there a man out there that she can find that doesn't have a PFA that is
Yeah.
still offers
Yeah.
I
great
think, like,
things?
I'm 42 and, like, I don't think anyone's ever said or thought they would need a PFA against me,
Yeah.
and I've
Okay.
been
Yeah.
half a century almost on this earth I'm getting towards, and it's like, I don't think so, like, it's not that
Yeah.
hard.
Then you have those posts where they're like on threads where the other day she was like, "Yeah, my dog died, and I'm just wondering how deep I could bury it and what I could put on top." And someone's like, "Oh, I see what you're doing here." Your dog, huh? Okay, well, if it's your dog, let me tell you what you can do. And,
I think you got some characters in these stories that could probably offer some,
yeah,
Yeah.
okay, let's put the endangered plant species on top of it so nothing can be dug up,
yes,
right?
love
Yeah.
that.
But no,
Yeah.
you're right though. Like there's just this what the hell do you have to be doing to even have these aspects? So that is a funny thing. I would wear that t-shirt.
Yeah.
It's interesting, like, some of the things you're saying. I've just recently been watching Mindhunter. I'd never seen it even though it's, like, 10 years old now, and
Mind
all of the
hunter.
serial killers are always innocent victims. Whenever they talk about it, it's
Mhm.
always like, and these are, like, people who I feel like the vast majority of humans are like, "Okay, these are the scariest people can get," right? But even then, they still see themselves as victims, and I think so often people can't kind of see between can kind of read between the lines of, like, when it's everyday more everyday people, not people who are actually being interviewed because they're mass killers. We have this idea that so like you said, so often it's like, "Oh, well, there's an excuse for why this happened," and it's like, "This is the reason," and it's like, yeah, chances are not. Chances are there's a very, very,
Yeah,
you know
yeah. And that's just it. It's like I'm not interested in you know, I'm sorry, at a certain age or a certain time frame or a certain like I was in a really crazy relationship at like 18 and was like, sure, I probably was like, we're not done talking here and we're gonna, whatever. But then you learn
Yeah.
and you say, I never want to act like that again. And I
You
never want to,
mature
yeah. And then you're like,
because
that's
you were 19 at the
18.
time?
Right. I don't know. It just feels like there's this, maybe it's just some people that are just narcissistic that they have no ability to self-evaluate or say, "Wow, I
Yeah.
gotta make some changes." Or I keep creating my own shit. I don't know.
One of the things that's
So,
really
yeah.
sad and I've heard a lot is that narcissists tend to prey on the most empathetic people. So a lot of times the people that
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
narcissists get into these toxic relationships with are these people who are just more apt to believe them because they just want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt and they just want to like, well, I'm
Mhm.
sure there's a reason for this, but it's like, sometimes empathy is about understanding that somebody else is toxic and there needs to be distance and that's not a lack of empathy. Boundaries and empathy can go together. You can have boundaries and have empathy, but not be like, oh, I need this person in my life or I need to make up excuses for someone. I always feel like the more excuses you're making up for somebody that you have any kind of relationship with, whether it's family or romantic partner or friends, that's probably a toxic person because an average relationship, you're not making up excuses all the time for someone.
You know what? I'm gonna replay this too. I'm just like, snip this. I'm gonna snip it. I'm gonna keep that on my phone and be like,
Lis
child needs to hear this
Yeah.
as they
Mhm.
navigate junior high, high school.
Yeah.
Which need to hear this because I don't know if it matters at any age, but like
Yeah.
what you just said, you can take it to the bank.
I think also, like, the problem comes with, like, when you are a decent person, you have
Mhm.
the assumption that other people are acting in that
Yes.
way too. And,
Yes.
unfortunately, it takes learning that that's not the case a few times to realize that you have to kind of watch people a little bit more and
Mhm.
kinda see what they do
Mhm.
before you go all in on them, right?
Yeah,
This is why you need
absolutely.
to read horror books because you become suspicious of people
Yeah.
and you can start seeing patterns too.
Mhm.
Like fiction really helps. You're like, mm-mm,
Yeah.
I've read about this plot.
Mhm.
This is
Yeah.
not going to end well, right? Your pattern recognition goes up.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think fiction does help us, realize we're not alone in our experiences because there's so many experiences as a person, and especially things that are most distressing. That's the stuff that people are most likely to keep to themselves. And so having that depicted in fiction helps people feel seen and realize, like, okay, this isn't me. This is something that other people have experienced as well.
Absolutely. And that makes all the difference. I've said many times that words that an author can put on a page that I haven't been able to think of or, I've had a feeling, but I can't put words to it, which I think is so important to be able to label or just
Mhm.
express what that maybe jammed emotion has been or that feeling. And then you read it on the page and you're like, oh my God, there it is. That's what was happening to me. Or,
Mhm.
oh, I get it now. Or and I'm so grateful for that. that we have talented people to be able to really transmute emotions that they've either experienced themselves or imagine and put it onto the page that we can all benefit from, because otherwise, I mean, you'd be stuck with a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like most of us who are readers and have been readers, most of our lives very much feel that way. It's made us feel so much less alone and has given us that language, like you said, to be able to name something like, okay, I've seen this now somewhere else that has nothing to do with me. So that helps us, know that we're not as alone as sometimes you can feel like you are.
Yeah. One thing that I love that you said going back, a little bit ago when we were talking about sort of like these, especially white male artists that have been given this pass because 'cause they're quote unquote "these geniuses that have produced these amazing works." I think about this all the time, how sad I am of all the works by women and marginalized
Yes.
voices that never even got to exist because they were
Exactly.
not allowed to write and publish. And, I love that we're talking to you during Women
Women's
in Horror
history.
Month, and, I love the post that you're making about it, but then also, we're living in a time where there is so much amazing books, stories, movies, all these things of horror written by women. And, I was actually just talking to I know you're friends with her too, Haley Newland was just saying like, I read books just because I choose to read them and I look up and I realize the last 10 books I've read have been all by women. And it's not even like purposeful. It's just that's where the good stuff is getting made right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for so long it's been so much. I mean, it's still tough to be a woman in this industry. That's something that so many of us have been talking about this month and really, voicing that to each other. But, it's historically it can even be more difficult. And, you look at things like the Brontes and, it was very hard for women to get published back then, and so I do think it's so important to raise up these voices and to make sure that these, that we're being heard. Speaking of being heard, if you hear my cat, she is trying to say she is a woman in horror, and she's like my little
Yeah, well,
furry cosmic horror, so if you hear her screaming, she's just like
she's very welcome. We
We have
always
2
have,
kittens that are rolling around their little scratch toys, so if you hear banging, that's our cats doing that,
yeah.
so
And inevitably, every time we go to, we always like record in our bedroom because it's the only place that is we can actually lock the door and the dogs can't come up. And I mean, they're just like little naughty children that need to, need something while you're so. But it always happens either during or usually like right before somebody uses the litter box.
oh,
And it
yeah.
is like, dude, we're about to use this as a recording
And
studio.
they're always, of course, dead-eyed staring while they're yeah.
Yes, it's like, okay. So, we've had a lot of cats. We've had some like meowing. We have other
Oh,
ones
yeah.
that want to be on the
It's all
yeah.
part of the
It
ambiance,
is like, and the
yeah.
fact that most of our guests have a pet that wants to join in
tells
too,
you all
we
you need
we
to know.
we welcome
Mhm,
it.
Yes.
These are good
mhm.
people, right?
But, it's interesting. I think, like, what I'm thinking and learning is, were these works by these, especially, again, white men, were they that good
Mhm.
or were they really just the only thing we were allowed to have access to,
Exactly,
right?
that's something I think about a lot, and people, build up certain artists, and they're so amazing, and I'm like, you know sometimes there's some things by those artists, I'm like, "It's good, it's fine," but I knowing that the harm that they caused, I don't feel like that work deserved to exist so much, like, "Oh, it's so important that anybody should have suffered for it," just because. And, this isn't it's just very frustrating to me, and again, we're still not giving all the resources to women or non-binary authors that we're still giving to male authors, and that's something that we're
Mhm.
seeing again and again. Even as I think women are doing so much great work right now in horror, it's still, mostly men getting the big budgets for promotion and things, not exclusively, and it's gotten a little bit better in the last 5 to 10 years, but it's frustrating and it's disheartening for sure.
Yeah, and it's an industry that, most of them are, but they love to tokenize too. So, like,
Mhm.
it's like, oh, this specific, voice or things. It's like, well, do that too. It's like, yes, and that those authors generally, when they that happens, they they deserve it because 'cause they've written really good books, but that doesn't mean that that's where you stop, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and there can be a lot of that of, like, "I'm giving a lot of funds to, so that's enough," and it's like, "Oh, that is."
Mhm.
Women are writing horror as much as men are writing horror. I feel like when you look around, that's
Yes.
so very clear, and women are reading horror as much, if not more, and I've actually heard statistics before that
Yes.
women read horror more
Yes.
than men do. So there's no
That's what
reason
I was
why
gonna
th
say.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
feel
there's
like
no
they read
reason
it
why
as
there
much
isn't.
more.
Yeah, there should be a lot more representation and a lot more, support. Oh, yeah.
I feel like women live horror daily, from anywhere from, menstruation where it's like just these athletes, like, as the Olympics pass to think like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you're just doing all this while menstruating?" Like, wow, like, that's horrific when that happens. You're
Mhm.
just having to live your life and show up and be like, "Yeah, I'm not in
Mhm.
horrendous pain," whatever,
Yeah.
birth itself, and then, you think just in general of just the things that women are expected and I don't know, like, I often think like, "Okay, how come I have to do, like, a 5 or 6-step routine at night?" Which I
Mhm.
don't, just FYI. Like, what no, I'm getting better at being because instead of just, "Let's just wash the face and let's moisturize, okay? I can handle that." But Adam has skin, but he's not required to do any of that. He's not promoted any of that, and I'm like,
Mm-mm.
"Do you want some moisturizer?" It's, like, really your face is dry and it's, like, winter, and he's like, "I'm fine." But, like, men aren't expected to do any of that. Like, it's not, and now, like, they tie into some of these men with, like, the
Mhm.
products and stuff, but it's just I'm saying that in terms of women, I feel like don't
Yeah.
they always are having to live to an expectation and
Yes.
to a societal thing, and just as we read some of these, books and just how much is, allowed, and just even through, like, the '70s of, like, how, you couldn't have a credit card,
I know that's
and it's just
still
like
that messes me up every time day that women couldn't have credit cards, I
yeah,
think until
and it's just like
1973. Yeah. It's
I know, and I
wild.
I bring this book up, but not often enough, but it's like it's pink on the front, it's like talks about, like, the first ever women's bank, and it was created by women for, like, for women, and,
Mhm.
because they talk about how you'd have to sit down and disclose your fertility status to your bank representative in order to
To
apply
get
for
a
the
loan,
loan
yeah.
and,
God.
have a note from your doctor saying you were infertile, and you're like, are you serious? Like, I have to it's just a lot of that's what I'm saying, and just, like, the books that are coming out right now about the lobotomies
Mhm.
and, just, "Oh, you're hysterical," or "Calm
Mhm.
down," and,
Mhm.
there's just a lot. So, anyway, I think women live horror all the time,
Mhm. Patriarchy is
it
it's
is.
horror. Yeah.
It absolutely is, and it's like,
Yeah.
if I'm at work, a man can be incredibly assertive. If I'm assertive, I'm a bitch or I'm causing
Yes.
problems,
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's all of that, and, I I I think I know too much versus they're just so knowledgeable,
Ugh.
and it's just like, okay, it is that. So, I know it's not just, women, like, I had seen, like, we talk about marginalized voices, but I had seen, like, Burn Down Master's House by Clay Cane, just
Mhm.
he said he didn't get any promotions,
Yeah.
nothing, like,
Mhm.
nobody helped, no, just nobody shouted out, and it's like he still ended up on the bestsellers because, like, of the, uh
Grassroots kind
yeah,
of, talk, yeah.
just the behavior towards that is just, it's uncalled for, right? Because it's like, why are we limiting to such small amount of voices? And then one last book recommendation, again, I haven't brought it up for a while, so I think I'm due, but the By Any Other Name by Jodi Picoult, which is exploring the concept that Shakespeare was a woman and
Mm.
potentially many women, and that they all submitted their works, and, like, he took the notoriety and got it published, but that there had to be many women that lived this life, in order to have the colloquialisms, the dialect, the deep knowledge of certain towns and
Mhm.
cities that they had never been to, and I think that fits a lot more, at least by the end, I was sold. But it
Interesting.
fits the narrative that you guys are saying that, women couldn't just write it.
In the 1500s, like,
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very frightening, and there's so many
Yeah.
people right now, and loud voices in politics that want us to go back to those times, and it's shocking that we're living in this, society right now that even, like, there are people who don't want women to vote, and I'm like, "My god, we got the right to vote over, like, 100 years ago, like, how is this
Yeah.
still being relitigated?" And it's just horrifying.
But I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like there's some deep shit that I don't
Well,
think we're really to like really talk about because it's like, yes, we've made progress in a lot of things, but we can't be having, to your point, Gwendolyn, we can't be having topics like this being brought up about women and the right to vote and the choices over their bodies and also trad wives being so popular if these things weren't still simmering under the surface. They have to
Mhm,
be, you know,
mhm.
because
And it takes up
they wouldn't
so much.
have social attraction. Right?
Yeah, and it takes up so much energy. It's weird to connect these 2 things, but we're talking about, having to argue against this idea that, like, we shouldn't be allowed to vote. The fact that we have to still be fighting to even be able to keep our right to vote, from everything from people saying we shouldn't to, like, the SAVE Act that they were just talking about today that would disenfranchise women.
yes.
But there's an odd connection back to, like, the five-step skincare routine, because here's the thing, it's keeping women so much away from being able we're doing so much mental labor or physical labor
Mm.
that we shouldn't have to, and that's taking us away from being able to do other things. I mean, it takes a long time to shop for all those skincare products, put on all those skincare products, do that whole thing. I also do not have a five-step skincare routine. Like, I wash my face, maybe moisturize, like, I'm good. And for anybody out there listening, if you do have that skincare routine, that's okay too. For some people, that's actually a time of day
It's
that they
great.
take themselves, and that's very
Listen,
important.
I just have ADHD and I can't commit to doing it. That's the problem. I have a real trouble with consistency. If I
Yeah.
could, I would. I would do the whole
Yeah.
damn routine because it feels really good.
I think that's an
Yeah.
amazing point, though, to think of lost productivity
Exactly.
and time, and I think that
Yes.
sometimes I hear that too when they talk about just money in general. What does money buy you? Free time to think
Yeah.
and do
Yeah.
things that other people, when you have 2 to 3 jobs, when you are told you have to be the one that cleans the entire house and make everyone's food and
Exactly.
take care of all these different things, it's like you don't have time to exist as an individual human.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think, when you're looking at artists, for example, when we're making women do so much other labor and just defend our
Mm,
basic rights and take all this time on making sure we look right, then in those cases, women have lost time that they could be creating art or doing whatever they want to do. Like we said, it could be free time, it could just be taking a vacation, it could be, you know, doing other things at whatever their job is, from medicine to, other forms of science. It could be anything. And it's frustrating to me, the amount of time that's lost just arguing over things or
mhm.
being forced to do things that are, or maybe not forced per se, but highly recommended to a point that you feel like you don't have a
Right.
choice. And
Yeah,
You're going to
I
take a
think that
penalty
and
somewhere if you don't do it.
well,
exactly.
then being accused of not being as productive as men, right?
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh, you're not working as many hours and doing," it's like that sort of, like, double-edged sword of, "You have to do this, but then when you
Hmm.
do it, I'm gonna, criticize you for that part of it too."
Hmm.
Welcome to the
Absolutely.
working mother,
So
Yeah.
crazy. Well
right?
well, then, you know kind of going on to that, like, it makes me think sometimes because they always steep it in this sort of like nostalgia or this like love for like this time that was different. And I think sometimes like I'm a 90s kid, 80s, 90s kid. I love, all of the entertainment and media from those times and stuff like that. But I always get a little like, prickly or whatever you want to call it when they start talking about how wonderful those times were. Cause I'm like,
Yeah.
no, there was a lot of
Yeah.
problems even in the '80s and '90s, when it came to, like, some of these things, so it's like trying to,
Yeah.
step around that, especially because I feel like it is so big right now, it's like everyone wants to talk about, like, how they miss the '90s and the '80s or whatever it might be because of big, properties that are out there that take place during that time, but it's like, no, we need to look ahead and move ahead and past some of those things, not
E-
look back to it.
Exactly. I do think it's interesting what nostalgia can do to us, and I don't always think nostalgia is necessarily toxic, but I think it can tip into toxicity very, very easily
Mhm.
because, there are aspects of things that you could say, certain rights we did have in the '90s that we don't have now, but then there was a lot of rights, like same-sex marriage was not legal, I think,
Yep.
anywhere in the early '90s. That wasn't until the late '90s that even a few states, individual states made it legal, so it's like, it really depends on your perspective as to who you're talking about. Maybe for some people it was better, but for lots of people it was much worse. So I agree. And I always think it's interesting when people like on the right are like the '90s were great. And yet if you really look at the
Oh,
1950s, everyone was shell shocked from World War II. And if you look like
yep.
kids even got married younger at that point, but it was because they were looking for some kind of stability and normalcy. It wasn't because people were so much happier in like their relationships. It was actually a very unusual time and not for good reasons. People were very messed up from the war and everybody was. And so I think that that's very very important to keep in
And that
mind, but I don't think a lot of people on the right ever keep that in mind. It's like the '50s were great. I'm like the '50s were not great.
No.
yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that because when Adam and I went and saw Nat Cassidy and Chuck Wendig at the local bookstore at the Midtown Scholar, they were saying, I think it was Nat who said it's like war, generation, generation, war, generation, generation. And it's like you can see the effects on the mental health for
Mhm.
each generation, the parents, the kids of those kids,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then there's another war that comes up. And it definitely does make an impact on, overall of anything from just the boom of, okay, how do we get people back to work? How do we get them integrated to how are we raising the family? Are we giving hugs? Are we saying I love you? There is
Mhm.
letting the baby cry it out. I mean, there's just so
Yeah.
many things that have changed over of actually being more considerate about soldiers' experiences and the impact that it
Yeah.
has on the family and then how that spreads out, and
Yeah.
how it cannot. And I think that um, you think Adam and I talk about that a lot of just like where, it's like the 10 o'clock, do you know where your kids are?
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
just have it minded and it just it was so different. I mean, we were just I feel like my parents of just growing up in the '80s, they were so cavalier with
Mhm.
the kids.
Mhm.
It's like you're fine.
Mhm.
You're and I don't think there was an issue with that um at that time, but now I don't find myself being like that, but I do feel like I don't know, I feel like we're trying to learn from all of our boomer parents' mistakes and hold space for these things that are coming out,
Mhm.
and how these impact.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and I think that it's also interesting you said that it's like war generation, and actually we never got 2 generations between wars because you think like World War II ended in like the mid-50s and then Korea was in the '50s and Vietnam was in the
Right,
'60s and spreading
right.
into the '70s, and I think you had like maybe 1.5 generations between that and then the first Gulf War, and then you had 10
Yep.
years, so less than a generation till the second Gulf War, and now we're, of course, at war again, so it's actually even worse than war
It's actually
generation, it's like
tighter
war
than
quarter generation and then more war, so yeah. Yeah.
so it's like where's the bread in the club sandwich? We're gonna have more bread than
Mhm.
meat, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that's I think that just look, I'm gonna get off my soapbox here, but it's like that imperialist, that
Yeah.
taking over, being the world's
Mhm.
place, all that I think that is still a derivative of the patriarchy and maybe bravado and just
Well, just
all
thinking
of
you're
that.
right, like, as a country, just
Right.
assuming your view is the one that should be everyone's, right?
I was saying I was listening to this podcast and they were talking about the Panama Canal and how in the early '70s they were genuinely really thinking about using a nuke to just get it going. And it was like we already learned. Like we
Yeah.
already learned all this and
Mhm.
like we know the hazards and it's like yeah, and I just think that it just shows the maybe capitalism of
Mhm.
just how well,
So
actually, the one thing I heard that I thought was amazing, they said, "We lure our American soldiers in by promises of socialism so that they can fight the war of capitalism."
oh, yeah.
And I was like, that's pretty damn profound because how many people do you know and how heavily do they target under income places or kids that don't have the ability to go to college or say,
Mhm,
oh, join this and the free healthcare,
mhm.
housing. And it is, it's like, then, and they don't position it as socialism because socialism is disgusting,
Right.
except for when it's good enough for the military, right?
Mhm.
Because those are benefits. And
Yeah.
so much of this just comes down to language. Anyway,
Mhm.
I'm kind of, as probably most people are up in arms about everything that's happening here and a
Yeah.
little overwhelmed. So
Yes. Well, I do love that you brought up nukes because it segues perfectly into asking you about your story.
Yes, it does, because 'cause I'm like, where is this going?" I'm like, "Oh, melting point, yes."
So,
well,
I
he's a
don't know when,
professional at bringing me back in.
but
Okay.
so I don't know when it was that, and obviously we both live in Pennsylvania, and,
Yes.
3 Mile Island is a specter that you always kinda hear about,
Yeah.
and I don't know when it was. It wasn't that long ago. It probably was longer than it feels like it is, but
Yeah,
there was
it's
a great
like the
documentary, I
70s.
think on
Yeah.
Hulu? Yeah. Yeah, but, there was, like, this documentary that came out maybe 5 or 10 years ago, I can't remember,
Okay.
about 3 Mile Island,
Mhm.
and then, like, I started reading the story and I was like, "Oh, this is about 3 Mile Island, I'm so excited," and I just love what you did with this, and, it brings in so many things about, basically the government or big money lying to the people around it. And then you bring in so many other things into the story. Is 3 Mile Island something that you've always been interested in too, or like being in the state where it happened and that kind of stuff, or where did the story come from?
I feel like growing up, I heard more about Chernobyl and it scared me, I
Huh?
don't remember a time when I didn't know of Chernobyl. And then at some point
Hmm.
when I was a kid, it was explained to me that it almost happened here with 3 Mile Island. And so it was like, I actually, for some reason, didn't think 3 Mile Island was in Pennsylvania growing up. I thought it was in New Jersey for some reason. Sorry, New Jersey. I don't know why I blamed you for this. This was Pennsylvania's doing. Yeah, it's just so frightening to me, this idea that when nuclear power does work well, it can be very clean, but then when it doesn't work well, it can kill everyone. And it seems so it seems so American in many ways that I always say we do everything to such extremes. We can do great things
Yeah.
here. The COVID vaccines came out of here. Other vaccines have come out of here. A lot of famous books have been published here first and great movies. We
Hmm.
have so much great art, but then we also do some of the most heinous things possible. So it seems like nuclear in some way is so emblematic of America, even though it's not uniquely American, right? I mean, Chernobyl, I just brought up, isn't in America. But at the same time, I just feel like 3 Mile Island in so many ways does feel emblematic of America, and I've watched some documentaries too. I probably saw the same one that you're talking about because it's like I've
Yeah.
watched a lot about it, and I just thought, this feels like something to really get into almost like the cosmic horror of it all.
It
Like, what
is.
if this opens up something to somewhere else? That's how my horror mind
Mhm.
works, and yeah, and that was really the idea, the sort of kernel for Melting Point.
Yeah, and I love, like, that idea of, like, and I think it happens so many different times, and we can see it where it's like, everything's fine, but stay inside, close your doors and windows, maybe you should leave if you're a child or the elderly, and you're like, "Wait, these don't add up."
That's what I was gonna say is I think that the lying and the
Yeah.
mistrust and the "It's gonna be okay," and, just seeing how it was more important to keep the company's name preserved
Mhm.
than the people that were in immediate harm, and that right there is inherently horror, I feel
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it's very scary, and I think that they're still talking about, trying to get that reactor up and running again. Periodically, people will
Oh,
talk about trying to get it up and running again, leave it alone. We're lucky that it
yeah.
didn't get worse, and there was absolutely there those documentaries show there are people who had signs of radiation poisoning even as it was, and it didn't melt down to the extent that it could have, although I believe in some of them, they show, some video, I think, inside one of the reactors, and there definitely was damage, there was melting,
Mhm.
so, it's very scary, it's just and I also think it's interesting that the movie The China Syndrome, which is about a meltdown, And I actually think it's a really great movie, but it came out like a week before 3 Mile Island. And it's like that couldn't have been like, it was great timing for the movie, but absolutely wild that like that movie about, a nuclear plant melting down comes out a week before we have like the worst nuclear disaster in American history. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
everybody was thinking about it, right? It was something that was on people's minds because I think there was that fear that it could happen. Yeah, it's just wild.
Yep.
Well, we just shouted it out last night on our Instagram, but the Radium
Oh,
Girls,
yeah.
Mhm.
the amount of it's fiction that reads like fiction, but the amount of
You wish it was fiction.
yeah, but the horror of the way that they just, like, made these women think that they were crazy for this, and they're like, "Nope, it's safe, it's so safe," and then they're like, they're experience I mean, I read Adam a few lines out, he hasn't read the whole thing, but just, like, the
Infuriating.
pus of falling out, the teeth falling out because they had to, like, take
Yeah.
these brushes and pointing where they would put it, and, like so but, if the radium went to other parts of their body, they would say, "Oh, no, that has nothing to do with it," and I mean, the fighting of just to keep things and I feel like when you're talking about things like the 3 Mile Island or, radium like that where they really felt like it was gonna be a
Yeah.
fantastic energy source, and they were willing to do anything they could to and it didn't matter at what point and what casualties, it's like, "Let's just keep this
Yeah.
going," and that is really scary of
Yes.
the ends justify the means, I that really creeps me out.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's yeah. Yeah, so it definitely is stuff that scares me, and that's why I just had to write about it because, like I said, like, Chernobyl has been something I've thought about for so long, I don't ever remember not knowing what Chernobyl was, so, yeah, it's very scary. It's a very scary world, and it's scary what we will do to ourselves, you know? This stuff didn't just
Yeah.
exist, we kind of created these situations, and it's just very frightening.
Right. And, it's funny because the stories in here, a lot of, thematically, when I think about it, a lot of these characters are almost finding their like deliverance or their freedom in the things that are the scariest or the most dangerous thing to them, right? Because it's like through this horrific thing,
Mhm.
the main characters kind of find a way to some kind of hopefully it
Yeah.
feels like happiness, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that, like, I feel like that's just, like, my very horror mind and almost the way I look at the world of, like, how can we push through this and try to get to something more transcendent on the other side? And so, yeah, very, very much so. I feel like that's something I also did in my first novel, The Rust Maidens, where the girls, like, turn into, like, the rust and rot of the Rust Belt. So that's Melting Point is probably makes a very good companion piece with The Rust Maidens. I hadn't thought about that till you just said it, but
And
yeah.
even, like, some themes from Velkwood too,
Mhm.
definitely, um, I think kind of do that as well, and I kinda wanted to, bring in another story which brings in a lot of these different things because I love the Sea Witch of the World's Fair. I'm obsessed with anything mermaid adjacent when it's done in a horrific kinda way, but I love one that, like I always love when a man or some asshole thinks that he's found a victim and then he gets, in this case, literally eaten, which just delights me to no end. But then I also love how you bring in, like, another one of those artists, and, like, I don't wanna disrespect, Salvador Dali at all, but I love how he's an afterthought. Like, it's like he's the one that's doing
Yes.
this, and it's like, he's there, he's
Yes.
around, okay, fantastic, but, like, he's really like, they're like, "He's weird," or he's like, "Huh, he really thinks this is amazing," but it's like, it's not that amazing kinda thing, and I love that aspect of it mixed with that same thing of, like, we're gonna find deliverance and freedom in something that most other people would say is horrific.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
so for context for anyone listening, like, the Sea Witch of the World's Fair takes place at the World's Fair where Salvador Dali created this, like, Birth of Venus, really bizarre little exhibition. I could not believe this was real when I watched a Dali.
Okay, I was gonna ask that. This was real. Okay, I didn't look it
This
up
was
yet.
real! This was real, which is just spins my head, to be honest, but it was this big giant like funhouse almost installation, and there were actually women who like were dressed up as mermaids and who would swim in these little pools, and there was all this weird stuff in it. There's lots of pictures that you can look at, and there's video too because I think it was 1939. And yeah, it was wild. I just couldn't believe that it actually was real and that I'd never heard of it before watching this documentary, and so I was like, "Okay, I wanna know about the girls who worked there," because, like, the World's
Yes.
Fair, lasted a long time. It lasted, like, I think, like, a year. They would go on for a long time, and this was in New York, and so I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna write about this mermaid. This girl plays a mermaid, but she actually is a kind of mermaid, and she gets a job working in this place." And so that's how, like, Dolly is, like, in the background. He's around, but, not really the star of it, which I thought was, like, really fun because I loved his art growing up. But, yeah, I thought it would be fun to see it from the perspective of these mermaids.
Yeah.
Well,
I
one
loved his
particular
art.
mermaid. Yeah.
Yes.
I loved his art growing up,
Mhm.
was obsessed, like, the books and all kinds of things, and then just recently learned some things that made me say,
Not
"Thank you."
no, yeah.
Yeah,
As a lot of these
as a
things are like
person, yeah, same.
mhm,
As
they're
time
like
has gone on, he was a Franco sympathizer in Spain. So yeah,
yes,
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 very, very, very problematic person in real life in a
yes,
lot of ways. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that
that's
was
why I love
something.
that it's like, like, he's, like, looking at these women, "Yes, you'll do for a mermaid. Who moved this couch?" Like, all these things where it's just very much like, "Really? That's making or breaking this weird fun house that the couch was moved 2 feet over."
Yeah, yeah. So
well,
I do love his art,
somebody
but
that has to
again,
be very particular.
he's another one who's very, very problematic. So it's very disappointing to find that out. Some people are like, "Oh, you're problematic babes." That's how I've heard it described before, and I'm like, "Oh, so sad. So sad." So we
Yeah.
just wanna have people who are just, like, decent humans that we can just be like, "We like their stuff," and we don't have to feel guilty about it.
Well, that's the thing, it's like, sucks so much that you have to do, like, full-blown research on
Yeah.
anyone when you see something that you like or read something that you like from them, it's like, "Alright, before I tell anyone I like it, I better go down the rabbit hole of researching this person."
Right? That's the thing I always get worried about because, I do so many recommendations through I have an column at the lineup that I do a lot of recommendations for. At some point, I'm going to end up, or I even sometimes do interviews on my blog. At some point, I'm going to highlight somebody who turns out to be terrible. I think it's already happened a couple times. I just take down the interviews or try to take that stuff down as soon as possible. But it's like, you can only do so much, and some people, may not be as overt about it until all of a sudden they are, so there's also that, but yeah, it's a sad, frustrating world.
Yeah, but it's definitely like one of those, "No, this is your fault. This isn't my fault for" it's like, "It's your fault for
Right?
sucking."
Yeah, yeah.
But I love it, and then the other thing in there that is this, like, the Vice police or
Yes, the Vice
whatever it is.
Squad.
Oh
Yeah.
my god, like, that is insane.
Yeah, there's still, like, vice squad some places, and it's so interesting, like, and horrifying. But a lot of this goes back to, like, the Anthony Comstock, who, like, founded a lot of these vice squads and things in, like, I think the late 1800s, and there's still a Comstock Act to this day that they use to, like, prevent people from getting birth control or try to use it to prevent people from getting birth control through the mail and things. It's
Agreed.
wild. So, like, vice squads terrify me. So, yeah, the vice squads. Spoiler alert, the Vice Squads don't have a good end, and that made me very happy. I was able to be like, "Let's take these Vice Squads down. These mermaids know what they're doing."
Yes, and that's one thing that I love about most of the stories that we have here, pretty much all of them, even, when we think about Lucy from
Mhm.
Dracula, who has a very, like, in the book and, like, always it's this very sort of, like, tragic but almost pointless life
Yeah.
and death, and I love the meaning that you give to that in a lot of these characters, like, in, I would say, probably books and stories written by, these kind of people we're talking about, they would still be that when, like, you take them and you make them the heroes, the heroines of these
Mhm.
stories, and you give them that happy thing that they deserve, and I know, like, as a writer, that's gotta feel really good to do that.
It does. It definitely is one of those things that I'm like, "Okay, like, I can at least right the wrong here. I may not be able to do it out and about in the
Yeah,
world every day, but I can at least do it here."
absolutely, and it makes it so satisfying, and I have to say between, like, this collection and other places that I've read your stories, and I love your novels as well, but your short stories, you're one of my top writers of short stories. Every single one I read, in this collection, I'm like, "Well, that was fantastic." There is no misses here in this collection, and I wanted to touch on because probably my one of my favorite short stories that I've ever read is your story in the Howl Werewolf Anthology by Women
Aw,
collection. Our howls
thank
like
you.
dirges, our eyes like the moon. I
Yeah.
could read an entire series of novels about and I just feel like I've never read someone write it's almost like a zombie apocalypse, but it's werewolves instead, and I'm like, "This is genius."
Thank you.
So, like, where did that like, obviously we have an awesome, werewolf story in this collection too, but, like,
Mm, mhm,
there's just so much there, and I just love that idea of this, like, the sort of freedom that, a lot of people are afraid of the wolf, but there's a
mhm.
freedom in, like, that as well, and I think you explore that in both stories, but, like, is that like, where did that idea, that seed of, like, a werewolf apocalypse come from?
I think I was really kind of going through and just brainstorming and being like, "What haven't I seen with werewolves?" And it was like that just really came to me, this image of these women holed up in this house and these werewolves just coming to the door and trying to, like, coax them out, and to me, it seemed so scary, and yet at the same time, I love wolves. I think they're few years ago, I did a photo shoot with a wolf, and it was, like, one of the happiest days ever. Like, this person, like, socializes the wolves and does a lot of, like, interactions with, like, the community and things to educate about wolves, and you can also do photo shoots with the wolves, and, like, the wolf licked my face. My husband took the pictures and, like, got picture of me, like, laughing as this wolf, like, licks my face, which is, like, just the coolest thing. And so, like, I'm a big fan of wolves, and I love werewolves, and I think that I don't think werewolves have been explored to the extent that, like, vampires have, and to me, I think that's really
Mhm.
interesting, and it's a place where we can still do a lot within the, genre, and I say that, I have a different werewolf story in the collection, and then my next novel is a werewolf story, so each one of them are vastly different.
What?
There's no connection between them, like, they're all totally different takes on werewolves because I just think they're so cool.
That's awesome. Now I'm even more excited for the next novel, so I'm glad to hear that. You also have a Gatsby retelling coming out from Creature in September?
I
My
do, that's
god.
in September, yes, and these Gilded Ghostly Hearts, it's like a retelling/sequel slash sequel to The Great Gatsby told from the perspective of Daisy Buchanan's daughter right after it starts just as Daisy dies in the mansion, like, much older.
My god.
And so that's where we pick up, and her daughter kind of has to unravel this mystery of this haunted mansion, which I just love the idea. Like, as soon as I found out The Great Gatsby was going into public domain, I'm like, I want to see that mansion haunted. Like, that mansion would so be haunted. It'd be haunted by those parties and all the horrible, like,
Yes.
you know, wealth and the gross wealth that was put on display. I'm like, yes, I need to. I wanted to just read that story, so I wrote that story.
I feel like you probably, like, without reading it yet, obviously just killed it because of your passion that you have for it, having wanting to see it and explore it, and I love how you just said, like, "I wanted to read it, so
Yeah.
I'm writing it."
Yeah, that's
I
always
love
the
that,
advice I give.
and no. I mean, in fact, if they're just, like, the things that are gonna be haunted in there, I'm very
Mhm.
excited to see what you selected.
Yeah, and not to mention, like, you come up with the best titles for everything, like, all of your titles are so good, like, that is just such an amazing title, like, this A Haunted House, as she calls her own, is such an amazing title, the stories even within it, like, your Bluebeard retelling is Her Skin a Grim Canvas, like, come on,
It's so
like,
poetic just in
so are those hard to, like, come up with? Do they just come to you as you've written it? Because like, I feel like titles would be so hard to make.
My stories are fairly easy to title. It's actually ironic, The Haunting of Velkwood, I couldn't figure out a title for. My publisher ended up figuring out that title. That's the one that I'm like, yeah, I think it was called The Velkwood Girls for a while. I could never think of a title for it, and then my publisher was finally like, "How about The Haunting of Velkwood?" I'm like, "That sounds fine." But ordinarily, like, I really enjoy it. I just was kind of like that story took a lot out of me emotionally to write, and I think I was so used up by the end emotionally that I had no bandwidth left for the title. But normally I do really enjoy, coming up with titles and everything. But yeah.
Can you go into that a little bit more of why that book took so much out of you?
Took in a good way, took a lot out of me reading it,
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
I was done at the end, I'm like, "Okay, you've gotten every tear, you've gotten every emotion out of me."
It was very personal and it was talking a lot about things that, I'd experienced or I'd been with people when they experienced certain things. And it was really dealing with a lot of stuff that I didn't wanna deal with and then kind of just threw myself into the deep end to deal with it, and so by the end of it, it was like, this is really intense. This is really intense. So, yeah, so by the time it came for a title, like, I kept thinking one would come to me and one never did, but normally, and that's the only thing I can say that about, I think. I think that is, like, the only thing that I didn't actually pick out the title for myself, but yeah, yeah, so
What's that like to have something that, was so personal to you and, for all that, then to basically come out and essentially win the best picture of horror books, right? Like, that's gotta be so fulfilling.
Absolutely.
it is. It was a good feeling. It really was because you think you're putting
Yeah.
yourself out there and there's so much vulnerability for every writer. Every time we put anything out there, even if it's not super personal, there's still vulnerability on the page. But then to really put yourself out there and then yeah, and then for that to happen, I really did not at all think I was going to win. I was actually very tired, and I had made the joke to my husband right before they announced the Stoker for the novel category. I'm like, "Well, it's good I'm not gonna have to go up there because 'cause I'm tired anyways." And then, like, I get announced, and I'm like, "Oh!" Of course, then the adrenaline kicks in, so I wasn't tired. I don't think I
Yeah.
Oh
ended up
my
going to bed till,
god.
like, 2 in the morning, but, like, I was very tired.
Oh my gosh. That's so crazy that you weren't expecting it, and then you're just like, "And I've gotta go perform."
Yeah, that was very intense. Yeah, I mean, it was there was so much great stuff nominated every single year for the Stoker, so it's like, it's always anybody's game in a lot of ways. I really do believe wholeheartedly that it's an honor to be nominated, to even get that far. I always try to tell people that who have been nominated, and it's like, that's a huge accomplishment right there. So, yeah, anybody out there who's ever been nominated, that's a huge thing too. Don't ever downplay that.
Yeah.
I'm not an author, but I definitely feel like when you see of all the books that like, I've read them and then they're up, I would not wanna be the person on the panel making those decisions. I just feel like, to your point, these books are all so good, and there's so
Mhm.
much good stuff they put out,
Yeah.
I think that is just the nomination is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, very much.
Yes. And, as we're getting here to an hour, one thing I really think is really cool is that, you have your indie roots, you are have books with, Saga and Simon and Schuster and everything. But then, like, you're with Raw Dog Screaming Press for this. You're, the next novellas with Creature. You're kind of like going back and forth. And I just love that because I think horror, at its heart is like the outlaw genre, right? So, like,
Mhm. Mhm.
still like doing the things with the indie publishing and stuff. Why do you think that is something that you want to do and do? And why would you say those places are so important for the genre and art?
Yeah, I mean, and I do think I talked a little bit about this even in my Stoker speech, was about how important indie presses are to the genre. And obviously, Big Five is important as well. My next book, the werewolf book I was talking about, is coming out from Union Square and Company, and they're an imprint of Hachette, and that's a Big Five. So it's like, I just think that it's so important to just support everyone because everyone's doing different things. Big Five can do certain things that indies can't, but that indies can do things that sometimes Big Five can't because there is that kind of rebellious punk rock freedom in it. And so I think that that's just so important. And I just, I love supporting indie presses and I love working with them.
Well, I love how you said it's like the punk rock
Mhm,
of the rebelliousness, and I would be remiss if I didn't take my moment to say, if Creature writes it or
mhm.
publishes it, I'm gonna read it because I
Yes.
love that to me is what they embrace.
Yes, I love that, Um, I love that a independent press can have a mission in a different way, right? Because like,
Mhm.
Creature Publishing, they're a feminist horror press, and, like, that's what they tell you, and that's what they publish, and hell yeah, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's very exciting. It's just great. It's really great. There's so many like I said,
Yes,
there's so
definitely,
many amazing indie publishers right now, so it's such a good
right,
time for horror.
absolutely, and, I love that you have 2 books for sure, coming out this year, and when is the next novel? When can we expect?
It'll be in next spring, so about little
Next
over
spring?
a year from now. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think we've
Awesome,
announced an
so we've got
official release date yet,
okay.
but yeah, that's like that's the tentative date is next spring, so yeah.
Well, we've got a lot of wonderful Gwendolyn Kiste fiction to read, and that makes me very happy. And this collection comes out April 14th from Raw Dog Screaming Press, as we said. It is excellent. Every single story in here. We are so excited to see everyone's reaction to it. Where can we find you? Like you said, there's lots of places that you're doing other stuff too. Are you going on
Yeah,
tour?
yeah, so,
Any
I
kind
mean, you
of
can find out
places? Yeah.
everything that I'm up to. You can go to my website, gwendolynkeist.com, and then also find me on Instagram and Facebook, and sometimes Blue Sky, Gwendolyn Keist, so I'll be, talking about the book tour that's coming up for this. That's gonna be the first, the release day party is gonna be at Riverstone Books in Pittsburgh, but I'm gonna be all over, so, yeah, I'm really excited.
Yeah, I think I saw you're gonna be in Doylestown, which is relatively close for us. We might
Yes!
try to pop over there to see ya.
Ooh,
So,
That
that
would
would
be
be so
wonderful.
great! I would love that. Yay.
yes, absolutely. So, very excited, and hopefully, when we get closer to September, that we can have you back on to talk about that one too, because I can't wait to read and see what you did there.
I would love that. That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much.
Awesome, perfect. Well, thank you, this was
You've been a
amazing,
delight.
absolutely, and I
Thank
hope you
you.
have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.